Alright, on to the next video today. Today we shall discuss war. Now, war is a number of things. Technically, it can be used to describe a conflict between nations, states, or even crime lords. For example, you might hear of a war between gangs in the streets of a city, like Detroit or some places in Mexico due to the cartels. What's important to remember about war, generally speaking, is that war is a conflict between groups or individuals. Now, it cannot necessarily be just a group. Because remember, when a state declares war, it acts as an individual. That is part of how the state functions, is it acts as an individual when it comes to negotiations. And so, for example, it is the United States who declares on the Empire of Japan, or it is the German Empire declaring war on the Empire of Russia. They are singular in that behavior. And so, even if one person decides to start a conflict between another person, that would be, under a basic definition, a war. Now, most people don't use it to describe conflicts between individuals unless it's a really drawn-out conflict, but it technically could be argued to be one. And, for example, if it's groups instead, let's say the lovers of the French and the haters of the French, then those groups can and will fight each other in a war. Now, it's not guaranteed. Sometimes people prefer diplomacy, but the nature of humanity is there will always be those who are willing to draw the blade. There will always be those willing to kill each other, even over a scrap of dirt. That's just reality. Do you think that we're going to be able to just get rid of all warmongers in even 100 lifetimes? No. There is no freaking way to get rid of all the people who want to spill blood in the name of their pet causes. For example, to do that, you'd have to get rid of me. Yeah, that's kind of part and parcel of being an imperialist. I don't exactly look down on the idea of going to war. I look down on needlessly wasting deaths, but if I believe it to be a moral and just occasion, I am more than fine with physical conflict. For example, oftentimes, war is fought over resources. As a matter of fact, it is a very common reason to go to war. For example, the Great Northern War, where the Russians wished to take a port on the Baltic Sea from the Swedish. So anything from gold to water to even things like, I don't know, fur. Because yes, people have fought wars over furs. As a matter of fact, if you know anything about your American history, you know that the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Haudenosaunee, however you want to say it, fought wars constantly with the Hurons over furs and trapping rights in the Ohio Valley. Now, so much for being a group of peace. War kind of came naturally to everyone. This is because we're human. Humans war constantly. If you have an ancestor, at least one of them, if you go back far enough, will have participated in a war. In fact, go back even further, you almost guaranteed to have every ancestor have fought in some regard. This is because we are humans. So, whether it be for resources, land, honor, / respect, or any number of other things, including ideology, of course, There will always be some reason to fight. You can get it backwards all you want. Things are still gonna have a reason to try to kill each other, especially humanity. But here's my question to you. I understand a lot of people are very peaceful now or want peace. What good is peace if you just allow others to war? For example, if you allow a thief to go uncontested, they're just gonna keep stealing. If you allow a warmonger to keep ruling a kingdom, they're just going to keep conquering, keep fighting. And if you allow slavers to continue operating, they're just going to keep enslaving, turning people into property and turning them into mere things for profit. Not even the worst capitalists go that far. But if you want things to end, if you truly desire peace, then you cannot settle for a world peace whose only definition is the end of conflicts between nations and states. Because nations and states aren't the only things that can go to war. They aren't the only things with a reason to bleed. As a matter of fact, they're the ones who force others to bleed in their name. The only way to stop it is to say to every single person on this planet, if you choose to fight, you will be crushed and you will lose. You must have a hegemony to end war. The reason why is quite simple. In every other scenario, people will be looking for another advantage, another angle for which they can gain more power. Another aspect of this thing that they have that they haven't expanded on yet, which they will try to see if maybe this way I can gain more power. The only way to stop that is to put the foot down and say firmly, if you try it, you get crushed. If you try to engage in imperialism without the consent of the hegemon, you will be laid to rest. Simple. And it's effective. Kind of hard to debate the one person in control of the world, is it? So, that's what you do. You need a hegemony. We have tried balance of power. We tried it with Napoleon with the Concert of Europe. After the Treaty of Vienna, that was the hope of Europe's great powers. If we just sign this document and all agree to make our own points and weigh in whenever there's a potential conflict in Europe, we'll just, have it work. Totally won't end up in another war. Except they did. First in Crimea, then with the Austrians. Then, what ended up happening was all of those people were constantly debating what should happen next after the Archduke's assassination. And no one would agree because those who would stand to lose were the people who would always get outvoted in those conferences. And there was no power that could just say, no, we're not doing this. You're not invading Serbia. So, they acted on their own. They declared war, and the chain of alliances was triggered. Now, there are numerous other factors that went into World War I, but the biggest, in my opinion, was that fake balance of power. Because this balance of power, this weighing of the scales in the hopes of keeping everything equal, resulted in every European power trying to find some way to tip the scales forever in their favor. The French, for example, set up a colonial empire and also backed the Italians against the Austrians, hoping that the Italians could weaken the Austrian hold over Italy and thus make sure that France had less to worry about from their old enemies in Vienna. Simultaneously, the British made sure to build a long and wide colonial empire, stretching across many time zones and down the entirety of Africa, with the only exception being Tanzania, which was owned by Germany. Germany, too, was one of the big influences in this concert because they were tired of it. Here they were, new power, rising rapidly and competing with even Britain in terms of wealth and resources. And yet they were denied all the privileges that was supposed to bring. They only had 3 colonies in Africa. 3. Britain had far more. France had more. The Italians were competing with them in terms of colonial territory. The Italians! So needless to say, without a hegemon to cool Germany's interests and desires, war broke out because they were more than willing to say to the Austrians, yeah, we'll help you. Because they were one of the few people who the Germans could look to as an ally. Especially because all the other colonial powers were having nothing to do with them because they were expecting the Germans to want to take their stuff, which, to be fair, the Germans were 100% willing to do. Let's not pretend like the Germans were exactly peaceful here. They were fully intended on conquering a bunch of places over the seas. But the fact is, when you try to balance the power between groups, everyone will be looking for an edge. Because with politics, you don't have friendships, you have interests. You don't have enemies, you have potential threats. As a result, everything was focused on how can we gain more land, more wealth, more prestige, and of course, more support for our belief systems. Everyone was doing this. The US was doing it. As a matter of fact, we were big interventionists in Latin America during this period. So were the British, who were constantly getting involved in foreign affairs, particularly in Asia. So you see, they would not let the Qing have a break. They had to do it with Japan, I suppose, but still. Then there are, of course, the French in Africa, who... Well, Algeria isn't exactly the shape it is now because of peaceful negotiations. And, of course, there are the Italians, who decided to bully the Ottomans into handing over Rhodes and, just casually all of Libya. Well, most of it. I believe there was actually negotiations between the British, but regardless. The point is, every single power was looking to increase its influence because this scale could not last. When a scale is balanced, sure, at first it looks great. But if someone has an interest in making the scale lean one way or the other, they're going to start tipping it. So that's exactly what happened. The scales started to be tipped in every direction for every power. If you truly want war to end, the only way that I can see is to grant one country, not an organization, one country, the power to rule the world. Now that may seem extreme, it freaking is, but that is the only way to do it. Even things like the UN, for all they try to do to bring peace to the world, they fail constantly. They failed in Africa. Ask the Congo how well they served to maintain peace during the Katanga crisis. They failed in the Middle East. We can see that even now. They had people in Lebanon for many years and didn't stop Israel from destroying many people in Hezbollah. They've had people over the world for years upon years to stop terrorism, extremism, and other things. And they've done jack all. The UN, in truth, is freaking useless as an actual international organization. Better than the League of Nations, but that's a very, very low bar. That's like saying you're better than poop at being edible. Unless you're a dog, that's not a compliment. The fact is, war will always exist so long as there's an interest in it. So long as people are chained, there can be no honorable peace. So, here's my question to you. Your ancestors have almost certainly fought for resources, fought for land, fought for the honor and respect of nations they barely cared about, fought for ideologies they barely understood. So here now, I propose to you this. Will you fight for something tangible to you? For family and for liberty? For the ability of people to live free so that no one else ever has to suffer what people in the past have. No one else ever has to be censored needlessly. No one else ever has to be treated as a slave. Will you fight for that? Because that is, in reality, the only way to move forward as a society. There can be no honorable peace so long as family and liberty are not protected. Once they are, then we can start the negotiations. So, all that being said, will you? Or will you let more people suffer and die for your cowardice? It's up to you. Make your choice. I know where I stand. The crusade for liberty shall not end until every single person is liberated. Have a good one.